Shit, did 2020 kill me again? What day is it? April 2021? Well, actually...
To many people, 2020 could be called the year when all hell broke loose. Whether it's because of personal issues with life, the political climate of your country, or the looming threat of a potentially deadly virus pretty much all over the world, I think we can all at least agree that this decade could have kicked off better. But thankfully, I am an alpha gamer male, and social interaction is very low on my list of priorities. In all seriousness though, while 2020 definitely wasn't the best year for gaming for partly the same reasons the year as a whole wasn't, I still ended up playing quite a few banger games all the while the world was getting worse and worse. Whether it's because I just simply wanted to entertain myself in quarantine, or because I wanted to escape the reality of said year, I don't know. But what I do know is that I played enough great games to make this list a top 15 again. And if this video is not out until April, you'll probably know why. At least I have more to gush about, I guess. I'm not sure if I've ever really made it clear, but I'm not that huge into mobile gaming. Sure, there are some I've definitely enjoyed, like Fire Emblem Heroes and Tales of Crestoria, but none of them have really gone beyond okay or just good for me. But leave it to some anime about slapping Japanese poem cards to get me into a mobile game that let me experience and really enjoy a real-life game I probably could have never tried otherwise. So I watched this anime called Chihaya Furu, and it has a card game named Karuta as its main focus. Needless to say, following the series got me interested in trying out the game in question, and lo and behold, the App Store had me covered with a free app called Competitive Karuta Online, which lets you experience Karuta from anywhere in the world within the comfort of your own smart device. The rules of Karuta are as follows. The two players first lay down their poem cards and then wait for the reader to read one of the poems on the tatami. The one who reaches for the right card faster gets to take it, and you win by removing all the cards in your own territory. In other words, the game is all about listening, reflexes, speed, and accuracy, as well as some strategic planning. What makes Karuta so fun is the accelerating feeling that follows every time a card is read, as well as the satisfaction of getting to the right card first. The app even adds some tension to the times when you and the opponent reach for the same card almost simultaneously, as you won't know which of you got the card until it's judged. There's a lot more to the game I didn't mention, mainly because we'd be here all day if I did, and I will admit that the game is mostly just a time sink, which is why it's at the bottom. But even so, it let me experience a central part of one of my new favorite series, and I will always appreciate it for that.
The Mark of a Model Citizen 2020.
So I've never really been into Animal Crossing. The closest I've had to an experience like that was Tomodachi Life on 3DS back in 2014, but there was something about New Horizons that drew me in to try it out. It might have been just because I did want to try out the series at some point, and the newest release seemed like the perfect excuse, but I don't know. I could feel myself really vibing with the island aesthetic, and the apparent changes they were making to the formula made me even more intrigued. And now, about 6 months after starting up the game, it's aight. Let's get the hopefully obvious thing out of the way first. This game is super comfy. The atmosphere of your island just oozes this relaxing vibe, and sitting down to do some mundane tasks around the island or collecting stuff to sell or use in your DIY projects is an easy way to have yourself a nice, calm moment. Unless you bump into wasps or scorpions, then you panic and run like a bitch. My favorite thing about the game though were the residents and the different facility keepers on the island. The residents are super chill, and I found myself getting pretty attached to each and every one of them, to the point where if someone wanted to leave, it was incredibly hard for me to even think about letting them go. And the facility keepers like Blathers, Isabel, and the Able sisters are all full of personality, and I still love them very much. I'll admit that I haven't really felt a strong desire to go back to the game, hence why it's pretty low on the list, but I still can't deny the amount of positive vibes this game gave me during the course of this year. Maybe the other AC games are somehow all vastly superior to this one, but as it stands, the island life do be the vibe for me. When I started to gather up potential candidates for this list, one game I was almost downright afraid to talk about was Spider-Man Miles Morales. It's definitely a game I like, and it deserves to be on this list, but I was afraid I'd spend most of its segment complaining about my issues with the game, while just recounting the things the first game did so well for Miles' groundwork. But after sitting on it for a bit, Miles Morales still manages to be a very entertaining game on its own. The story, for one, is a lot more personal tale, centering around Miles' growth and his new home in the Harlem district. And I like that a lot, as it gives the narrative more room to focus on the characters surrounding Miles, as well as Miles himself. The first game had a solid cast, but here it feels more tightly knit together, and even a lot of the side characters are pretty memorable. The gameplay, on the other hand, is just as fun as the original. Traversing the city with web slinging feels good, the combat is tight and satisfying, and the new mechanics, like the venom attacks and invisibility, bring new depth to the gameplay not seen in the original. And even though I feel the game is a bit overly reliant on the new powers sometimes, I do think they're pretty fun to use overall. I think I'll stop there, because if I went any more in depth, I'd just go on and on about my issues with the game, and I don't really want to do that because I still enjoyed it a lot at the end of the day. And if anything, this little appetizer just makes me even more excited for the proper sequel somewhere down the line. In the meantime, I'll help myself to the other big upcoming Insomniac title, assuming my poor ass can afford a PS5 anytime soon.
Alright, the next game we're gonna talk about is a GameCube game. Got my legitimate Nintendo GameCube and my totally legitimate copy of the game.
Paper Mario is a series I've always had interest towards, but none of the games I got to play were really able to suck me in. Not that the original game and Super Paper Mario were bad games from what I played, they never just became a big priority for me is all. And while the Thousand Year Door isn't perfect at satisfying my awful attention span, I'd say it got me hooked a whole lot better. The narrative isn't exactly anything incredibly special, but what really makes it work is the writing. The game has a really good sense of humor, and the tone is all over the place, but it doesn't feel jarring thanks to the overall lighthearted feel of the setup, even with some of the darker subject matter. And the way the game parodies tropes from other types of stories and other RPGs, while still adding its own beats to some of them, helps the plot feel mostly pretty fresh throughout. As for the actual RPGing, the game has a pretty simple but enjoyable turn-based battle system. You control Mario and his partners in battle with reaction-based button commands, and everything you can do both to defend yourself and add damage to your attacks make the battles that much more engaging. It might be simple, but the mechanics are easy to grasp because of that, and pulling off moves perfectly as the game goes on never fails to feel great. Though the reverse is also true, because missing the first command of a multi-hit move always makes me feel dead inside. Add in some enjoyable exploration mechanics and cool locales, and Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door is definitely worth its salt, at least in most aspects. I do have some issues with the game's core structure that overall make Mario and Luigi my preferred Mario RPG, but it's still a great time, because sometimes the difference in quality between JRPGs is only paper thin. So I've gotten more into God of War during these past few years, which is pretty surreal to say because I thought I'd never play these games, but leave it to Santa Monica to make their Greek god-slaying simulator really heckin' fun. And even though I had a small bitter taste in my mouth with how God of War 2's story ended up, God of War 3 was just so much fun that I don't really care anymore. At its core, the main gameplay of God of War 3 is pretty much the same as the first two games. You use Kratos' scary chain blades to take on all sorts of monsters and mythical creatures and expand your arsenal the further you get. But the combat feels polished to perfection this time. Not that it was bad in 1 and 2, far from it, but everything just feels a lot more fluid and satisfying to pull off. The same also applies to the new weapons this game introduces, and I end up using them all a lot more than I did in the previous games. And yeah, the story is not very good, with most of the game basically having Kratos throw temper tantrums over his daddy issues, but I still found some ironic enjoyment in most of it. And not gonna lie, there were a couple of moments I even liked unironically, showing that Kratos isn't exactly happy about what he's become. Of course, it's mostly overshadowed by him screaming ZEUS on a regular basis, but I'll take the small victories. And with some pretty enjoyable puzzles and banger boss fights, God of War 3 is an amazing action game. I wouldn't put these games quite on the same level of character action games as Devil May Cry or Yakuza, but it's still a very fun time all around. Very intrigued to check out the PS4 reboot sometime in the future, because the only sworn enemy I have is my backlog. If you've been around this channel, you might have heard me say on occasion that I'm not very good at 2D platformers. But I still play and seek them out because I'm a masochist apparently. And one developer whose 2D platformers I've had my eye on for a while is Inti Creates. And while the first Azure Striker Gunvolt was a fine game, its sequel blows it out of the water by a long shot. Gunvolt 2 plays pretty much the same as the first game, with tagging enemies and then electrifying them with the flash field, but I feel the level design complements Gunvolt's abilities way better than the first game. Plus, with a new playable character in Copen, the gameplay loop becomes that much more fresh, and much like Gunvolt, his levels complement his abilities really well. While the switching between Gunvolt and Copen can get a bit jarring due to how different their playstyles are, they're easy enough to grasp that you'll be back to having fun in no time, even after switching over. The game's story also really surprised me with its quality. It does share some narrative problems that the first game had, but I found myself way more invested in the plot this time around. With a much more compelling and entertaining main villain, some super solid character writing with both the Gunvolt gang and Copen's family, and a couple of surprisingly emotional moments, Gunvolt 2's story is definitely nothing to sneeze at. So if it wasn't obvious, I enjoyed the second adventure of the Azure Striker immensely. And while the game didn't hook me into kudos hunting or speedrunning all the stages, I'm still very much looking forward to the series' future. And with what we've seen of Gunvolt 3 so far, I'd say the future is looking pretty good.
I wish swords were real.
As I've no doubt made clear many times on this channel, I really like Sly Cooper. And by extension to that, I will mercilessly consume anything made by its creator, Sucker Punch. The Infamous games are some of my favorite games on the PS3 and beyond though, so it's not the worst deal in the world. But when it came to their newest title, Ghost of Tsushima, I admittedly had my worries about the gameplay and various other things prior to its release, but having now tried out the game properly, yeah, it's pretty fucking awesome. The story setup is pretty simple, with the main character Jin Sakai fighting against the Mongols raiding the island of Tsushima, but it's the smaller stuff that makes it interesting for me. Jin's gradual change from a by-the-book honorable samurai into a ruthless warrior who's ready to do anything to protect the things he cares about, along with his personal connection to some major characters, give the story more nuance. And it makes for a pretty engaging story overall. But the gameplay is what we're here for, and holy moly does Ghost of Tsushima give you a lot to play with. The samurai combat, the stealth gameplay, and all the different tools of the Ghost blend together really fluidly to deliver a truly satisfying and varied experience. And along with all the side content, it truly feels like this game has DNA from both past Sucker Punch IPs. Also, the samurai stare downs might just be the only time I get excited for murder. Due to the game's massive size, is I haven't beaten it yet, which is why I don't really feel comfortable putting it any higher than this, but I can say Sucker Punch has unmissed once again. I don't think you need me telling me that, considering it's a big profile AAA title that people with way more clout than me have probably praised, but Ghost of Tsushima is just that cool. You might remember me mentioning last year that I'm not into pure visual novels, as in the kind that include mostly reading and very little traditional gameplay. However, I've recently made an effort to get more into VNs, as the stories they tell can be truly amazing, something I've learned from the few I've already played. So what a better way to step into this mostly uncharted territory than with the Persona 4 of visual novels. I promise this comparison makes sense. So Steins has been around the block for about a decade now, and last year I finally popped the cherry on it. As little of it as there is, I actually kinda like the gameplay. Instead of regular dialogue choices like in most visual novels, Steins uses the phone trigger system, where your responses to emails and calls are what determines the path you take, and I appreciate the interactivity and uniqueness behind it. I understand it makes some of the required choices a little complicated, but most VNs require you to use a guide to get to their true endings anyway, so... But the story is what we're here for, and while I'd say it suffers a bit from pacing issues and other things, it's a pretty solid narrative once everything falls to place. A tale of a wannabe scientist who accidentally discovers time travel only to be swept up into almost otherworldly circumstances, learning the value and the pain of memories along the way. It's an interesting plot to be sure, and one that gets better the further in you go. The cast is really solid too, and they honestly make the story for me. Everyone gets their relative time in the spotlight, and the perspectives we're offered help the player to sympathize with them. And that's not even mentioning the heaps of character development some of the cast gets, especially the main character, Okabe. So all in all, while I don't hold Steins as this holy grail of storytelling that most others seem to do, it's great for what it sets out for, and if you're thinking of diving into the world of pure visual novels like me, I could think of worse ways to get started. With the Final Fantasy VII Remake actually getting released last year, I decided that it would also be the year I'd finally finish a Final Fantasy game. And to my absolute surprise, not only was I able to finish 2 Final Fantasy games, but the original Final Fantasy VII ended up being really fucking good. And with me playing some of the remake last year as well, I think I might like this game. Now, one thing that's always kind of pushed me away from these games is their combat system, as they look to be as bare bones of turn-based stuff as you can get. And while 7's battle system is pretty basic, I still got a lot of mileage out of it. The big thing that makes this system is the materia, where you can basically slap any kind of skill on any character if you're choosing and go wild with it. And since customization is one of my favorite parts of RPGs, the materia system scratches that itch and then some, especially when you can make someone like Barret the main healer. But what made me fall in love with FF7 overall was its story. It's been flanderized a lot over the years, but in the end it's a very effective story about themes like finding a place to belong, the burden of carrying on the wishes of the deceased, and maybe some environmental messages here or there. And with a solid cast of fun and interesting characters to boot, there's not really much to complain. Except maybe that they're still not as good as Tales. But yeah, all in all, Final Fantasy VII rocks, and it truly was every bit as good as the 90s kids hyped it up to be. And I can't wait to dive deeper into the remake and see what the later parts have in store. I could also dive deeper into the compilation stuff, but from my experience with Advent Children and Crisis Core, maybe it's better I keep away from that can of worms. I feel that for the past while, the majority of media I've gotten into, I've had pretty concrete expectations prior to actually experiencing them. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing, since it's good to know what you're getting into before making the decision to consume, but sometimes I think it's good to let loose and jump headfirst into something you know nothing about. The reason I bring this up is because that's exactly what I did with Odin Sphere Leifthrasir. As you might probably guess, a big reason as to why Odin Sphere interested me was its visual style. And hot damn, the trademark Vanillaware art is absolutely beautiful. It seriously feels like I'm playing through a painting. So the visual presentation is on point, but the sound side is no slouch either, with Leifthrasir's soundtrack being full of energetic and hype battle themes all the way to the more emotional and somber pieces for the hard-hitting story moments. As for the gameplay, it's a combination of a dungeon crawler with randomly generated rooms and a Metroidvania-esque side-scroller with hack-and-slash combat. And it's a lot of fun seeing what each room has to offer in terms of its bounties and how the game rewards you for finding secrets. The combat is great too, as each of the 5 characters have their own unique and fun fighting styles, and combining the tools of your base kit with the different moves you gain throughout the journey only makes it all even more fun. While the story has its handful of weird quirks, and it plays a few common fantasy tropes pretty straight, I still like it a lot overall. The 5 main characters, Gwendolyn, Cornelius, Mercedes, Oswald, and Velvet, are all very likable and have some interesting stories to tell both from their own perspectives and as their own characters. Some of them more than others, but I still like them all a lot by the end, so I win. So Odin Sphere is pretty fantastic, and if you haven't given this PS2 RPG classic a shot yet like I hadn't, this remake is right there waiting for you. Definitely looking forward to checking out more of Vanillaware stuff from here on out. If you've been around this corner of the internet for like 10 years, you'd know that the Countdown community was pretty obsessed with a semi-obscure hack-and-slash game named No More Heroes. And I finally decided to get this Wii cult classic for myself last year, only for it to get re-released on the Switch a few months later. Why do you do this to me? Anyway, believe it or not, those people actually had a point back then, because No More Heroes is pretty fucking cool. As you can probably guess, the thing that makes No More Heroes a lot of fun is its combat. Fast-paced beam katana action combined with responsive and non-intrusive motion controls that help make each enemy finish satisfying as hell is really all I could ask for in life. And while not all of the bosses are absolute hits, when they're good, they're super entertaining, fun to fight, and overall some of the biggest highlights of the game. I really like the overworld too, and even if the jobs can get a bit monotonous, it's really cool to just take in the city of Santa Destroy. And combined with a cool and kind of a clever story, the overall package of No More Heroes is definitely... Oh shit, I need to talk about the second game too. Yup, we got another tie in this house. Look, I'll admit that Desperate Struggle's lows are way lower than the first games, but the overall game is honestly just as good, and a lot of what I already said about NMH1 can also be applied here. The game's still a lot of fun with some improvements to the formula, like tighter combat, way better level design, and jobs that are actually pretty fun. And even though I do appreciate the first game's story for what it is, I feel that the characters are a lot more realized in the second game, and I even grew to care about Travis on some level. The bottom line here though is that both No More Heroes games are absolutely worth your time, faults and all. And with the third game not too far on the horizon, there's not a better time to embrace the Countdown community's pet project than right now. I really hope game developers will continue this recent trend of bringing back beloved franchises by making direct sequels to older games. Because last year we got DMC5 out of that, and this year we got literally Crash Bandicoot 4. Sorry Wrath of Cortex, you don't exist anymore. I mean, with the success of the Insane trilogy, a new game was only a matter of time, and the end result is honestly pretty spectacular. I think my favorite thing about Crash 4 is how it takes the main main components of the original PS1 trilogy and refines them even further. While the levels are still linear, they have much more scale to them, which helps in making each level stand out on its own instead of just being another hallway. And what also helps with this are the wide variety of different level themes. And while there are levels that share the same theme, they all feel a lot more distinct than previously in the series. I also really like the new additions this game makes to the formula. The quantum masks flow really well with the level design and are pretty fun to use overall, and I love the flashback tapes with their additions to the Crash lore and the interesting challenges they present. I'd also say the same about the inverted levels, because completing old levels with a mirrored design and visual alterations is a neat idea, but they also add to the biggest problems with the game, those being the repetition of levels and the 100% completion, because attempting to complete the game will probably have you ending up something like this. Add in some fun alternative playstyles with Dingodile and Tawna, and Cortex sometimes I guess, a fun bouncy soundtrack and an art style oozing with personality, and It's About Time is more than worthy follow-up for the original trilogy. And as long as we can have people like Toys for Bob working on these games, we can prove that the platformer mascots still have the soul. This is a hint on what Toys for Bob should work on next, by the way. I personally believe that video games are an art form. I don't know if I really say that enough, considering a lot of my favorite games are so because they're fun to play and such, and some of the more artsy games tend to sacrifice their gameplay over story or presentation. But when these games nail it, they're some of the most memorable experiences you can ever have playing a game, and to me, Journey is one of those games. Despite its very minimalistic nature, Journey is actually pretty fun to play. The Journeyer, or the Wayfarer I guess, has a very graceful way of moving, especially in midair, and just moving around with them is a lot of fun, especially in the areas with a lot of slopes and such. Exploring is also a big part of this game's appeal, as each area is very much open for the player, and the game even rewards you for doing so with the symbols that lengthen your scarf and these cool relics for lore, I think? But what makes Journey so effective is, well, the journey. The structure of going through harsh environments to finally reach the light at the end is not only a meaningful metaphor for life in general, but the presentation really pulls you into the experience. You are the Cape guy trying to reach the top of the mountain. Another thing that adds to this is the multiplayer feature, where other randomly selected real people playing the game will occasionally join you as you make your way to the top, and you end up building a bond with these strangers by the end, just like you probably would after a real-life journey like this. Honestly, I could sit here shilling this game to you for hours, but I doubt anything I said would do it justice. Journey is something that needs to be experienced for yourself, and I don't exaggerate when I say that it's a game I think everyone should play at least once.
Am I allowed to like Shin Megami Tensei now?
So a couple of years ago, I decided to dive into the more traditional side of Shin Megami Tensei after becoming a fan of Persona with a little RPG called Digital Devil Saga. Shortly after finishing it, I did think it was a great game, but not really anything special to me, probably mostly because the game kind of ended on a cliffhanger. But that just meant I had another demon-devouring adventure to go through, and by the time I was done with Digital Devil Saga 2, it all just clicked. Once the second game started giving some answers to the lingering questions left by the first game, I started to appreciate the narrative as a whole a lot more. The story explores humanity with pretty much the entire cast in various different ways, and the themes of camaraderie and redemption help to make it all that much more impactful. And while every character is not necessarily complex, their personalities more than make up for it in most cases, plus their roles in the story serve to give more power to the story's themes. I've also come to really love SMT's staple press turn battle system, as it's very satisfying to exploit enemy weaknesses for more turns, and DDS's version of it might just be the most versatile and therefore the best form of it. Not only is every party member treated equally, but the mantra system gives so much freedom to what you want to do with each character. And with you having free reign over which skills each member has equipped at a time, you can make sure you always have all your bases covered. And that's not even mentioning the cool bells and whistles DDS2 adds in, like the karma rings and the mantra grid improvements. Top it all off with one of the best soundtracks to bless SMT and some awesome story moments that I still think about months after finishing the game, and Digital Devil Saga 2 might just be the wave. If the rest of the SMT catalog is even half as awesome as these two were, I think me and the Funny Demon series are going to have a very long-lasting friendship. Alrighty, here are a few more games that also brought me some joy in the 2020 hellscape. Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne, a really cool RPG with amazing presentation, fair difficulty, and fantastic world building. I do have my issues with the story and some gameplay elements though, which is why DDS2 edges it out. Yakuza 6, The Song of Life. Overall enjoyed this final chapter of Kiryu's story from beginning to end, even if the combat was a bit meh. The ending wrecked me though, and that's really all that matters. Steins Gate 0 has some really high highs when compared to the original, but also really low lows. A great companion piece for sure, but I feel overall it's a bit underwhelming. Among Us, a really fun game with friends, but I haven't really played it enough to warrant its placement on the list. Also, what the hell guys, he's clearly the imposter, he's Sosa's Super Monkey Ball Banana Blitz. Very inferior to Deluxe in terms of level design, and the lack of cutscenes makes me a sad boy, but I actually like a lot of its ideas, and I had fun with some of the levels at least. Donkey Kong Country. Been playing this on and off on the Switch Online app, and it's a really fun and solid 2D platformer. Might be the honorary number 16 to be honest.
Well, buddy, I just can't seem to stop.
It feels insane to me that 2020 was the year I finally got almost fully caught up with the Yakuza series. As I've said multiple times in the past, Yakuza has been dominating my life for these past couple of years, and the thought of being completely done still doesn't feel real. But it's a good thing that one of the games I had left not only ended up as my new favorite in the series, but also one of my new favorite games in general. Yakuza 5 is truly something special, folks. While the game's overall narrative can get pretty convoluted and some of the plot beats don't quite hit the mark, the emotional core of the game is unmatched, and the moments where the characters go all out in more ways than one are easily the story's highlights. It also helps that the returning characters are at some of their strongest here, and the new characters introduced are just as strongly written. But what makes Yakuza 5 my favorite game in the series is its gameplay department. Not only do all the characters feel insanely good to play, there's tons of variety too, ranging from Saejima's mountain survival minigame to Haruka's fun dance battles and safe driving simulator featuring Taichi Suzuki. There's so much content, and the amount of content combined with the best leveling system in the series and the combat being super tight and fun make playing through Yakuza 5 really rewarding. And with various locales to explore and another soundtrack full of bangers, there's no doubt in my mind that this is easily the best game I played in 2020. I'm FinnishDuck, and to me, Yakuza 5 is a perfect representation of why I love this series so much. It stumbles at points. Some of its decisions, be it in gameplay or writing, don't always hit the mark, but at the end of the day, these games are fun and have real heart and soul behind them, and it makes a lot of its flaws not matter all that much in the long run. And because of that, y'all should really play these games. I'm begging you. I wanna be a hero, Pokemon! And it's done. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, even though it was late by a couple of months again, but hey, that's how we do things around here. In all seriousness though, the beginning of this year has been a bit rough and motivation hasn't been the highest, which also played into this video taking so long. I think next year I might skip on doing this countdown in its normal form because I have some plans for a different type of year kickoff video that's still kinda similar to this one, but I'm not entirely sure if I'm going to do it, so I'll just play it by ear for now. As for other videos, I have a lot planned, including stuff that was supposed to come out last year, but stay tuned because I will bomb you with content, which will probably still be irregular as fuck, but when the content bomb does happen, it'll be nuclear.